In the bustling city of Unugu, Pastor Chukwudi Eze was celebrated as a man of God with uncommon power. His church, Fire of Zion Ministries, pulled thousands every Sunday, with testimonies of miracles, healings, and sudden wealth flooding the congregation. People traveled from far and near, desperate for his prayers. He was adored, respected, and even feared, for many claimed his words carried the weight of prophecy. His presence in the community was larger than life, and his family lived in comfort. His wife, Ngozi, was praised for her humility, while his loyal assistants shadowed his every step. But behind the glistening altar and holy facade, there were whispers. Neighbors spoke of strange lights at night in the church compound. Others claimed they heard muffled cries when no service was holding. Still, no one dared question the revered pastor until the night his secret came crashing down. It was the church security guard who stumbled upon the horror. He had noticed Pastor Chukwudi sneaking into the basement at odd hours. One night, curiosity overcame him, and he decided to follow from a distance. His heart pounded as he descended into the dimly lit underground room. There, on a wooden table, lay 3 freshly severed human heads, their eyes wide open as though caught in eternal terror. The smell was suffocating, the sight unbearable. The guard froze, unable to scream, as the pastor hummed softly, his hands stained with blood. The next morning, the police stormed the premises, tipped off by the terrified guard. When the congregation arrived for Sunday service, they were met not by gospel songs, but by the shocking image of their pastor being dragged away in handcuffs, his white robe smeared with blood. At the police station, the officers pressed him for answers. At first, Pastor Chukwudi refused to speak, his eyes darting like a cornered animal. Hours later, with sweat dripping down his forehead, he finally muttered, "It is not what you think." The investigators leaned in. He continued, "I was instructed by the spirit of the altar. The heads are sacrifices, not for me, but for the church's survival. Without them, the power dies. Without power, the people leave. Without the people, the church collapses." Gasps filled the room. The officers exchanged uneasy glances. To them, this was not just a crime, but a blasphemy of the highest order. Yet they suspected he was still holding back something even darker. That night, in his cell, Pastor Chukwudi begged to speak with his wife. When Ngozi arrived, her face pale and eyes swollen from crying, he grabbed her hand and whispered, "Forgive me, my love. I never wanted you to know this way." But to the shock of the police watching from behind the grass, Ngozi did not cry harder. Instead, she looked at him coldly and said, "You weak man. You couldn't even cover your tracks properly." The pastor's face drained of color. "Ngozi, you knew?" he stammered. Her lips curved into a thin smile. "Of course I knew. I was the one who introduced you to the covenant. Don't pretend you didn't beg me for more power when the church was failing." Years earlier, when Fire of Zion Ministries was barely surviving, Ngozi had taken her husband to a mysterious prophetess deep in the village. The woman promised them fame and influence at a price. The ritual demanded human heads, carefully selected, to sustain the growth of the ministry. At first, Pastor Chukwudi resisted, horrified by the thought. But after seeing his church crumble, debts rising, and members leaving for other pastors, he gave in. The first sacrifice was swift, and the results were immediate. The church overflowed, donations poured in, and miracles began to happen. Each year, more sacrifices were demanded, and though guilt aided him, his greed grew stronger. Yet what he never knew was that Ngozi had her own reasons not of loyalty to him, but of vengeance and ambition. During further interrogation, another bombshell dropped. One of the victims was identified as a young woman who used to sing in the church choir. Her name was Amara, and she was secretly the pastor's mistress. The discovery shook the congregation. Whispers turned into outrage. The man of God who preached purity had been entangled in forbidden love. Worse, one of the severed heads in his possession belonged to Amara. When confronted, Pastor Chikwete broke down. "I loved her," he confessed, trembling. "But Ngozi found out. She forced me to sacrifice her. She said the covenant demanded it." Tears streamed down his face as the weight of betrayal crushed him. The police interrogated Ngozi, who finally revealed her motive. She had known about Amara long before her husband confessed. Her humiliation burned silently, but instead of leaving him, she chose vengeance. "I didn't just force him to kill her," Ngozi admitted with icy calm. "I wanted him to watch his lover's blood become the seal of his downfall. Every cut he made on her body was a cut to his soul. That is how betrayal feels." The officers recoiled, stunned at her coldness. It was no longer just about rituals. It was about revenge, envy, and a woman's fury carefully hidden under the mask of a pastor's wife. As the case gained momentum, another twist emerged. One of the pastor's trusted assistants, Brother Emeka, had secretly been feeding information to the police. It was he who convinced the guard to follow the pastor that fateful night. When confronted, Emeka revealed his reason. "I once trusted him as a father, but he destroyed my sister. She was one of his victims. I swore I would end him, no matter how long it took." This revelation added fuel to the fire. The congregation that once adored their pastor now spat at his name. His betrayal of the people was complete, and his enemies had been hiding in plain sight. Days before his court trial, Pastor Chikwete made one final confession. In a trembling voice, he admitted that the covenant was never truly about the church's survival. "It was about me," he whispered. "I wanted power, fame, and wealth. I told myself it was for the congregation, but it was for my pride. Each sacrifice haunted me, but I silenced the voices with the applause of the crowd. I killed for glory, and I lost everything." Tears rolled down his cheeks as he fell to his knees in the cell. "Amara's face will never leave me. I betrayed my God, my people, and my soul. I deserve whatever comes." The trial drew massive crowds. Former church members cursed his name as the evidence was laid bare. The 3 human heads, the blood-stained garments, and the testimonies of those he betrayed. The once revered man of God was reduced to a shivering shell. Ngozi too was charged, her cold-blooded confession sealing her fate. Yet she showed no remorse. Instead, she raised her chin proudly and declared, "Better the world know the truth than let him continue his lies." As the gavel struck, sentencing them both to life imprisonment, the congregation wept, not for the fallen pastor, but for the faith shattered by his greed, lust, and betrayal. And so, Fire of Zion Ministries burned to ashes, its legacy forever marked by scandal, human heads, and a confession that left Nigeria speechless.